truth, power, and the price of reality. Every generation wrestles with the same haunting question: is it better to be good or to be effective? The world rewards strength, strategy, and control, yet our conscience whispers about integrity, justice, and truth. This is the timeless crossroads between Socrates, the ancient philosopher who died for truth, and Niccolò Machiavelli, the Renaissance political realist who redefined power. Their philosophies could not be more different, yet both speak directly to the struggles of our own age, the age of spin, manipulation, and moral compromise. Imagine them sitting across from each other, Socrates calm and relentless, asking uncomfortable questions about virtue and justice, Machiavelli sharp-eyed and pragmatic, explaining that politics is not a realm for purity but for results. One believes truth ennobles the soul, the other believes truth can destroy a ruler who doesn't bend it to his will. Between them lies one of the oldest and fiercest clashes in human thought, a war between truth and power, ethics and survival, idealism and realism. This video explores that clash in depth, not as a dry philosophical debate, but as a living tension that defines how we lead, obey, and live. We'll see how Socrates' pursuit of moral truth shaped his understanding of justice and leadership, how Machiavelli's political realism shattered centuries of idealistic thinking, and how both views continue to battle in our societies today. Ultimately, we'll ask, can truth and power ever coexist, or must one always betray the other? 1. Socrates, the philosopher of truth. Socrates lived in 5th century BCE Athens, a city proud of its democracy but increasingly swayed by rhetoric, popularity, and political corruption. He stood out precisely because he refused to play the game. Instead of chasing influence, he chased understanding. His life's mission was to awaken people from the sleep of ignorance, to make them examine their beliefs, question authority, and pursue moral clarity. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living, and this conviction defined not only his method but his fate. To Socrates, truth was not a convenient tool or a political weapon. It was sacred. He taught that virtue and knowledge are inseparable. If you truly know what is good, you will do what is good. Evil arises not from malice but from ignorance. Therefore, the role of the philosopher, and by extension any just ruler, is to seek truth above all else, even if that pursuit brings discomfort or danger. Socrates' dialogues, from Gorgias to Crito to Apology, show him standing firm in front of power, exposing hypocrisy through logic and calm questioning. He does not persuade with flattery as politicians do, but with reasoning that pierces self-deception. His commitment to truth, however, brought him into conflict with Athens' leaders. Charged with corrupting the youth and impiety, he chose death over renouncing his ideals. His final act, calmly drinking hemlock rather than escaping into exile, turned his life into a testament that truth is worth more than power. Socrates showed that the moral strength of the soul outweighs the might of the state. He represented a radical idea that the most powerful man is not the one who commands armies, but the one who commands his conscience. 2. Machiavelli, the politician of power. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years to Renaissance Italy, a land torn by war, betrayal, and shifting alliances. Out of this chaos came Niccolò Machiavelli, a diplomat and political thinker who saw firsthand how fragile and treacherous power could be. Where Socrates saw truth as sacred, Machiavelli saw it as dangerous, a luxury that rulers could rarely afford. In his famous treatise The Prince, written in 1513, he stripped politics of its moral clothing and exposed it for what it really was: a ruthless contest of survival. Machiavelli's world was not governed by virtue or reason but by fortuna, and human nature, which he believed to be selfish, ungrateful, and fickle. For a ruler to survive, he argued, he must master virtue, a flexible blend of courage, cunning, and decisiveness. To preserve the state, a prince must be willing to act immorally when circumstances demand it. It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both, Machiavelli wrote, shattering centuries of idealistic moralism. In his eyes, the philosopher's obsession with what ought to be blinded leaders to what is. His realism was revolutionary. Machiavelli rejected the idea that politics should serve abstract virtue. Instead, he claimed that power itself was the foundation of political order. A good ruler is not a saint but a strategist, one who understands deception, uses appearances wisely, and bends morality when the security of the state is at stake. For him, lying, manipulation, and cruelty were not sins but tools, dangerous ones, yes, but sometimes necessary to protect the greater structure of society. In Machiavelli's vision, power is the truth of politics, the rest is illusion. 3. Truth and virtue versus power and prudence. At the heart of the conflict between Socrates and Machiavelli lies a fundamental question: what should guide human action, truth or survival? Socrates believed that truth was the compass of all moral and civic life. To live rightly meant to act according to justice, even when it brought suffering. Virtue was not a matter of convenience, it was the very essence of being human. He warned that doing wrong in pursuit of gain corrupts the soul, and that the corruption of the soul is a far greater loss than any political defeat. In Socrates' Athens, where politicians won favor through charm and empty promises, he stood as an unyielding reminder that truth is not negotiable. For him, power divorced from virtue is not real power, but a sickness disguised as strength. Machiavelli, however, would find this idealistic stance naive, even dangerous. He viewed the world through the lens of survival, where the ruler's duty is not to preserve personal virtue but to preserve the state. In his eyes, truth and morality are useful only when they serve stability and order. A ruler guided solely by moral purity would soon be crushed by rivals who played dirtier. For Machiavelli, prudence, the ability to act effectively in the real world, is the highest virtue. The truth, then, is not an abstract ideal but a practical one, the truth of how power actually operates. He sought not to justify cruelty or deceit for their own sake, but to recognize their inevitability in human affairs. If lying or betrayal can prevent the collapse of the state, then they are not immoral, they are necessary. Thus emerges their great divide. To Socrates, the just life means never compromising one's moral compass. To Machiavelli, the just ruler must sometimes abandon conventional morality for the greater good of stability and survival. Their disagreement isn't simply about politics, it's about the nature of the good itself. Is goodness rooted in unchanging truth, or in pragmatic results? Socrates defines virtue by principle. Machiavelli defines it by outcome. And this single difference reshapes everything: how one governs, how one justifies actions, and even how one defines humanity. 4. The role of the ruler and the state. Socrates' vision of leadership springs from his devotion to moral inquiry. To him, the ruler should be a kind of philosopher, one who knows the good and acts according to it. The state, in turn, exists to help citizens cultivate virtue and live harmoniously under justice. Authority, therefore, is not about domination but about guidance. True power lies in wisdom, not control. The ruler's duty is to improve the souls of citizens, to awaken their moral awareness, and to ensure that the laws reflect truth and fairness. If a ruler governs without virtue, the state becomes corrupt, no matter how prosperous it may appear. In the Socratic worldview, the health of the polis mirrors the health of its leader's soul. Machiavelli could hardly disagree more. In The Prince, he portrays the ruler as a craftsman of stability, a master of manipulation and necessity. The purpose of the state is not to make people virtuous but to make them secure. The ruler's success is measured by results: unity, defense, continuity. Compassion and morality, while admirable in private life, are liabilities in the public arena. A ruler must appear merciful, faithful, and honest, but be ready to act in the opposite way when required. For Machiavelli, appearances matter more than inner purity, because perception shapes obedience. Power, once lost, cannot be regained through honesty alone. Thus, he redefines leadership as a performance, one that balances fear, respect, and cunning. The contrast between their ideals is absolute. Socrates would see Machiavelli's prince as a tyrant of appearances, a man enslaved by ambition rather than reason. Machiavelli would see Socrates' philosopher king as a dreamer doomed to failure. Yet both share one point in common: they understand that leadership requires mastery, whether of truth or of fortune. The difference lies in their belief about what mastery means. For Socrates, mastery is self-control and alignment with the good. For Machiavelli, mastery is adaptability and command over others. One builds his state on justice, the other on fear, and the world still hasn't decided which vision wins. 5. Morality, governance, and the human good. Socrates viewed morality as the foundation of both personal and political life. To him, the state's purpose is to nurture the soul, and a just law must align with universal truth. In this sense, morality isn't optional. It is the structure of existence itself. When the state acts unjustly, it wounds its citizens' souls, turning them away from reason and toward corruption. Socrates' refusal to escape execution illustrates his belief that one must never commit injustice, even to avoid harm. His moral code is absolute: no compromise, no excuses. The human good, for him, lies in the pursuit of wisdom and harmony between reason and action. The just state is the one that teaches its people how to live rightly, even if that means defying power. Machiavelli dismantles this idealism with cold precision. He does not deny morality's value, but he relocates it. Morality must serve politics, not dominate it. For the state to survive, it cannot afford the luxury of moral absolutism. Leaders must sometimes act against charity, faith, or honesty to prevent greater chaos. To Machiavelli, the human good is not purity of soul, but the endurance of the state. Stability is the supreme moral achievement, because without order, virtue itself becomes meaningless. In a world of enemies, conspiracies, and uncertainty, moral rigidity invites ruin. The wise ruler, he argues, must be flexible enough to act against virtue when necessity commands, and skilled enough to disguise it when he does. The tension between their moral worlds could not be sharper. Socrates' morality looks upward, toward eternal truths that define justice regardless of consequence. Machiavelli's morality looks outward, toward circumstance, timing, and consequence itself. One risks death for integrity, the other risks integrity for survival. Together, they frame the enduring question of governance. Is it better to lose power and keep one's virtue, or to win power and risk one's soul? Every leader in history, from kings to presidents, stands somewhere between those two poles, between Socrates' truth and Machiavelli's power. 6. Socratic critique of Machiavelli. If Socrates were alive to read The Prince, he would likely react with alarm, not out of pride, but out of concern for the human soul. For Socrates, truth and justice are inseparable from the good life. To abandon them is to descend into chaos within. He would see Machiavelli's world, built on deceit, fear, and manipulation, as evidence of a society that has lost its moral compass. A ruler who lies or kills to preserve power, Socrates would argue, wins the world but loses his soul. No matter how prosperous his state, it stands on moral rot. For Socrates, injustice poisons both the oppressor and the oppressed, and no calculation of benefit can outweigh that inner decay. Socrates would also challenge Machiavelli's belief that moral flexibility ensures stability. In his view, a society grounded in fear and deceit cannot be stable at all, because it lacks the unity that only truth can provide. When leaders rule by manipulation, they train citizens to do the same, to cheat, lie, and betray when convenient. The result, he would warn, is not order but corruption. Athens' own downfall in his eyes was born from the same disease. Men who prized power over virtue and rhetoric over truth. If the state's foundation is injustice, it will eventually devour itself. Power may last for a time, but it cannot heal the soul of a city sick with deceit. Finally, Socrates would question whether Machiavelli's version of the greater good is truly good at all. For him, goodness is not defined by outcome, but by intent, by harmony with the truth. If a ruler's actions are unjust, no outcome can sanctify them. Even if deceit preserves a kingdom, it corrupts what it means to be human. The moral law, Socrates would insist, is not a strategy, it is a truth that defines existence. By rejecting it, Machiavelli's prince may achieve greatness in history books, but he forfeits greatness of spirit. In the Socratic view, the ultimate tragedy is not to lose one's crown, it is to lose one's character. 7. Machiavellian response to Socrates. Machiavelli, however, would not bow to these criticisms. He would respect Socrates' purity but dismiss it as unworkable in the arena of real politics. It is easy, he might say, to die for virtue when one has no kingdom to defend. From his perspective, Socrates misunderstood the stakes of governance. The ruler's duty is not to perfect souls, but to preserve the state. When a city is under siege, when enemies conspire and citizens rebel, moral purity becomes a liability. For Machiavelli, leadership demands choices that philosophers can afford to condemn, but rulers cannot afford to avoid. He might argue that a philosopher who insists on absolute virtue risks destroying the very society that allows virtue to exist. He would also accuse Socrates of ignoring human nature. Machiavelli saw people as unpredictable, often selfish, jealous, and quick to betray. Men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers, he wrote. They shun danger and are greedy for gain. To govern such people, a ruler must not depend on their goodness but on their fear and respect. In this sense, he would claim to be the greater realist. He takes humanity as it is, not as it ought to be. For Machiavelli, a ruler who insists on honesty and compassion in every case invites ruin, because he assumes the world will meet him with fairness. It will not. Survival requires cunning. Finally, Machiavelli would argue that his philosophy is not immoral but amoral, a description of necessity, not preference. He does not celebrate cruelty or deceit for their own sake. He describes them as tools in a world already steeped in both. The ruler who refuses to use these tools is like a surgeon refusing to operate because blood is unpleasant. For Machiavelli, power is the reality beneath all politics. Truth is the ornament we hang upon it. He might tell Socrates, "Your truth is noble, but my power keeps it alive. Without stability and protection, philosophy itself would perish." And thus, he would claim that power, not purity, sustains the possibility of truth. 8. Points of convergence and possible synthesis. Though they seem like polar opposites, Socrates and Machiavelli share a surprising common ground. Both are obsessed with understanding human nature. Socrates studies it through moral reasoning, Machiavelli through political experience. Both distrust appearances and value knowledge. Socrates seeks knowledge of the good, while Machiavelli seeks knowledge of the real. Each man exposes illusion. Socrates dismantles the false virtue of demagogues. Machiavelli exposes the hypocrisy of rulers who pretend to be moral while acting ruthlessly in secret. In their own ways, both are committed to unveiling truth, one moral, one pragmatic. A potential synthesis emerges. If we imagine a leader who embodies both their strengths, such a leader would share Socrates' moral compass, but wield Machiavelli's strategic awareness. They would understand that integrity without intelligence leads to defeat, but cunning without conscience leads to tyranny. The best ruler then might be one who uses power wisely without being consumed by it, who navigates the world's harsh realities without abandoning truth as a guiding star. In this balance, Machiavelli's virtue and Socrates' virtue could coexist, forming a new model of leadership that is both effective and ethical. Yet this harmony is fragile, perhaps impossible in full. History shows how often power corrupts even the well-intentioned. Socrates reminds us of the cost of betraying moral truth. Machiavelli reminds us of the cost of ignoring reality. Their conflict endures precisely because both are right, and both are incomplete. The world needs Socrates to remind rulers that power without virtue is hollow, and Machiavelli to remind philosophers that virtue without power is helpless. Their dialogue, if not their agreement, remains essential. It is what keeps the eternal struggle between truth and power alive in every age. 9. Modern implications and reflection. The debate between Socrates and Machiavelli is not confined to ancient Athens or Renaissance Florence. It echoes in every government office, newsroom, and boardroom today. Every modern leader faces the same paradox. Should they speak the truth and risk losing power, or manipulate the truth to secure it? Socrates' voice lives on in the demand for transparency, accountability, and moral integrity in politics. Machiavelli's shadow appears in every act of strategic deception, political spin, or calculated silence. We may call it public relations, but the question is the same: do we value honesty, or do we value control? In democracies, the Socratic ideal often collides with the Machiavellian necessity. Citizens demand truth from their leaders, but punish them when that truth exposes weakness or complexity. Thus, leaders learn to curate their image, to say only what maintains confidence. A thoroughly Machiavellian move. The philosopher's honesty can end careers, while the manipulator's cunning often wins elections. Yet history shows that deception has limits. Power built on lies eventually collapses under its own weight. The challenge is not whether Machiavellian tactics work. They do, but whether societies can survive them in the long run. When truth becomes optional, trust erodes, and when trust erodes, power becomes brittle. Each of us, in small ways, faces the same choice: to live by truth or by strategy. Socrates would urge us to preserve the integrity of our souls, even at personal cost. Machiavelli would whisper that virtue without strength is a losing game. The modern world, with its 24-hour news cycles and moral compromises, demands both their voices. The danger of becoming purely Socratic is irrelevance. The danger of becoming purely Machiavellian is corruption. The art of leadership and of living lies in balancing truth with power, conscience with consequence. Conclusion: between truth and power. Socrates and Machiavelli stand like two mountains on opposite sides of the same valley, one representing the peak of moral truth, the other the summit of political realism. Between them stretches the landscape of human history, filled with those who have tried and failed to reconcile the two. Socrates teaches that truth is eternal and that power must serve it. Machiavelli insists that power is reality and that truth must adapt to it. Each is right within his own world, and each exposes the other's blind spot. Socrates reminds us that power without virtue is tyranny. Machiavelli reminds us that virtue without power is impotence. Together, they form a dialogue that never ends. Perhaps the lesson is not to choose one over the other, but to live consciously between them. A just society cannot survive on Machiavellian cunning alone. It rots from within. Nor can it survive on Socratic idealism alone. It collapses under its own purity. The challenge of civilization is to bind the two, to let truth illuminate power without stripping it of effectiveness, and to let power defend truth without corrupting it. The harmony between the philosopher and the prince remains humanity's unfinished project, the dream of a politics that is both wise and strong, both moral and effective. In the end, the clash between truth and power is not merely philosophical. It is personal. Every decision we make, every compromise we weigh, every truth we choose to tell or hide, brings the same question home: which world do we serve? Socrates, or Machiavelli's. Perhaps wisdom lies in realizing that both worlds are ours to shape. Power without truth enslaves us. Truth without power leaves us voiceless. Only when we learn to hold them together, to act with strength yet live by conscience, do we come close to mastering the art of being human.